Hello. Today, we will continue with the second part of It's Okay to be Unique, following up from last time. Today's topic is developing abilities into strengths. In the previous chapter, there is content about echolalia, so I will introduce that first. In the second chapter, it explains the topic of understanding language in autistic children using echolalia. Echolalia is the repetition of another person's words. However, traditional methods involve punishing echolalia, preventing its use, or ignoring it. Doing this dismisses the child's efforts to connect with the world and communicate with people. There is no meaningless speech in what our children say. We need to approach it this way. This is because there are quite a few instances of echolalia that can be understood if we listen closely. Therefore, echolalia is not a meaningless mimicry, but a much more complex and purposeful expression. For example, a student named David mumbles, "We don't pee on the wall," while running around the classroom when teachers say no. This is David's way of expressing that he knows he was scolded before. Also, a child named Jeff says "ahai." This means that he is expressing pain. Just like this, by listening carefully to what our children say, observing them closely, and paying enough attention, we can understand what it means. Who understands echolalia the best? Of course, it's the family. Therefore, it is said that a family-centered approach is the most effective way to overcome autism. Therefore, it is more desirable for experts to rely on parents and other family members or the children themselves rather than parents relying on external experts. I also wholeheartedly agree with this statement. The reason is that I, too, and many other parents often think that if they leave it to the experts, it will be resolved. Therefore, conversely, I believe that parents should take the lead and collaborate with experts. The problem is that parents are too busy or exhausted, so they end up having no time to spare. Of course, it's a difficult issue, but I think this lack of time is somehow related to setting priorities. Therefore, I think it's necessary for parents to take some time to organize where to set priorities and where to invest their time and effort. In this regard, instead of using repetitive language, I am introducing ways to help using creative language. For example, go to the refrigerator, take out the milk, and also bring some snacks from the cupboard. When you give multiple instructions in one sentence like this, it can be very difficult for children. So the suggestion is to break it down into shorter parts. Go to the refrigerator, take out the milk, open the cupboard, and take out the snacks. Each instruction should be in a separate sentence. Another method is using photos, drawings, or letters, which is often referred to as visual language. Children with autism often understand better by looking at pictures rather than reading text. So when my child found it difficult to understand abstract concepts or social studies through text, I would have them draw pictures. My child liked drawing and was good at it. By looking at the drawings, I could assess how much they understood. And I remember that by helping them modify the drawings, it improved their understanding. People with autism often have a strong tendency to express and understand language through visual methods rather than just through listening and speaking. For example, there's Elia, who sings a song from The Lion King when they don't understand something in class. Of course, this disrupts the class. So to reduce the disruption, teachers give them a sketchbook and tell them to draw characters from The Lion King in the sketchbook if they don't understand. So they share this as an example of how they solve the problem. Another characteristic of our children is that they tend to repeatedly recite lines from dramas or movies. In fact, my child also has a bit of this tendency. Children with autism often feel anxious around people due to neurological factors, struggle with sensory overload, and find it difficult to create spontaneous speech. A child desperately trying to get his point across. Be quiet, stop saying such stupid things. How do you think they would feel? It doesn't help at all. It discourages the child's efforts to communicate, and the child becomes even more stressed. This leads to the child avoiding people even more, closing off, and giving up. Therefore, teachers and parents should listen carefully, observe closely, and ask why. Here I will mention the case of a child named Namir. Namir was a huge fan of the Disney movie, Peter Pan. Many people worry that spending too much time immersed in movies might be harmful to development. Parents in particular have a lot of concerns. However, Namir's parents bought him character dolls from the movie and actively engaged with him, which made Namir feel that his parents respected him. Later, he used lines from Peter Pan to use language appropriately, and eventually he became better at making friends with people. The third chapter is about nurturing the abilities our children have as strengths. Especially children with autism tend to have significant obsessions, but even these obsessions can be guided in a positive direction. The traditional approach tries to prevent children from immersing themselves and redirects their attention elsewhere, or encourages them to be interested in socially accepted, ordinary things. This disrupts the strategy that a child with autism uses to maintain calm. It is much more desirable to approach by using the child's passion to broaden their perspective of the world and improve their quality of life. There is a case mentioned here about Kate, who was said to be obsessed with car license plates. So at school, they had her take pictures of car license plates in the school parking lot, find the owners, interview them, and present the results in class. Through this, our Kate improved her social and communication skills. I would like to share a related case about our child here. I want to explain how important confidence is. When our child was in elementary school, speaking was very difficult and making friends was challenging. However, our elementary school had a broadcasting club. But the broadcasting club teacher, for some reason, had our child share prayer requests at the final stage of the broadcasting club. At first, the voice was barely audible, but as time went on, the speech became clearer and more confidence was gained. Then, the teacher took it a step further and made our child the main anchor the following semester. But surprisingly, our child did an excellent job as the main anchor. What I found most important during this process was giving the opportunity and our child gaining confidence. This was when my child was in the 6th grade, and I believe it played a significant role in improving their social skills and relationships with others. I'm still very grateful to that teacher, and I believe that if parents or teachers around us give our children such opportunities to gain confidence, it will greatly aid in their development. There is a reason why our children become interested and passionate. Just as ordinary people have hobbies and interests, when a person with autism shows interest in something, it's important to consider that the subject may align well with their neurophysiological aspects and serve an important function. However, the subject may not be typical, and the intensity of their passion might be stronger, which is the difference. It can be somewhat concerning when someone shows more passion for objects than for people. However, it's worth questioning whether this is really such a big problem. There are various cases where parents have recognized and developed their child's interests related to such obsessions. For instance, a child named Alexandra was obsessed with new cars, and her parents even took trips to see new cars. Another child named Chad was obsessed with sprinklers, and his parents acknowledged this by buying him sprinkler nozzles. A child named Ken was obsessed with mazes, and he found comfort by looking at maze books whenever he was having a hard time. A child named Vinny was obsessed with vacuum cleaners, and they created something called Vinny's Happiness Book for him. In it, they cut out and pasted catalogs related to vacuum cleaners. Another child named Danny was obsessed with spices, and his parents acknowledged this and later helped him become a culinary expert. A child named Hakeem was obsessed with train schedules, and his parents allowed him to take the lead during family trips. Another child named Stanford was obsessed with trains, and later he was helped to work on route and schedule planning at the Chicago Transit Authority. Like this, when a child is engrossed in something and we join in, a trust relationship can be built based on that passion. The problem arises when a child's interests or obsessions become problematic. For instance, if the object of obsession is something like women's ankles, it is not socially acceptable. In such cases, it is important to teach them to understand the boundaries of socially acceptable behavior and the rules that must be followed in interactions with others. Of course, this should be done according to each individual's abilities. For a high-functioning child who can communicate to some extent, it is suggested to provide them with a list of socially acceptable behaviors. If the child is relatively lower functioning, it is important to emphasize what they should do rather than what they shouldn't, and to communicate the rules they must follow with a firm attitude. Here, if we misunderstand the idea of understanding and listening to children, we might think we have to accommodate everything, but that's not the case. We should broaden our understanding, meaning we should expand the boundaries of what is acceptable when we say something is allowed or not allowed. As mentioned earlier, things like waving hands and not making eye contact fall within those ponder boundaries. Previously, we thought those actions were outside the boundaries and prohibited them, but for behaviors that are not problematic, we should understand and accept them to some extent. However, for actions that are socially unacceptable, they should not be done, as they ultimately harm our children. In such cases, when those boundaries are crossed, we must be firm and thorough in ensuring our children do not engage in such behaviors and must correct them. I hope there is no confusion about how much of a boundary to allow and how to guide when those boundaries are crossed. When discussing methods to teach communication skills, one characteristic of our children is that many of them tend to only want to talk about what they are interested in. In such cases, it is advisable to create a list of when and where it is not appropriate to talk about certain topics, and when and where it is okay, and continue educating them on this. Since these children are able to communicate to some extent, I believe that if we organize and continue educating them, they will improve over time, even if it takes a while. The various questions listed below are ones I consider to be very meaningful, so I have enumerated them here. Instead of simply prohibiting, let's ask why. Looking at the list of questions, when does the child become more fixated? Is there a certain pattern? Does the child seem to be under stress? What could be the reason for the stress? How can we reduce the anxiety and pressure the child feels? Could it be that they are saying such things to soothe their anxious mind? If that's really the case, is stopping them the best solution? Is the child aware of their own actions? How can we make them conscious of how they appear in the eyes of others? By creating these various questions, we can reflect on them ourselves and also ask our children when necessary. This is because finding the cause and purpose of such behavior helps in finding a solution. We'll stop here for today. I will introduce the remaining part of part 1 next time. Thank you for watching. See you next time.